Derby. Situated in the heart of England, this now bustling city is said to be one of the most haunted places in the country, with almost every street containing tales of phantoms and grisly shades of the past. Today, we've come to investigate one of the city's most haunted buildings, the Old Jail. The jail, located on Friargate, was a scene of crime, justice and punishment for nearly 100 years after its opening in 1756. In that time, there's been 58 executions, as well as hundreds of other deaths from murder, suicide and disease. We'll be spending the night in what's been described as one of the most haunted buildings in all of the country, to try and make contact with any prisoners still incarcerated here so many years after their mortal remains have crumbled to dust. Derby Gaol was erected in 1756 in the Nuns' Green area of the city, containing 7 cells, and was designed to hold a maximum of 29 prisoners. This limit, however, was soon exceeded, with at one time 70 people imprisoned here, with up to 6 people crammed into these tiny cells, a breeding ground for filth, disease, and of course, death. Anyone from execution victims to poor debtors spent time within the jail, many never leaving the grounds alive. In the 18th century, there were over 200 offences punishable by death in Britain, anything from murder and rape right through to setting fire to haystacks and petty theft, all of which would see the offender sentenced to hang until death. Now it's here, in this very jail, where 58 people were held prior to their executions, and I can't imagine the sort of things that must have been running through their minds as they wait here, counting down the days until their final moments upon this earth. Now it's been speculated, and I certainly agree, that maybe one reason this jail is so haunted is not just because of the despair and anguish that went on behind its walls, but because many of the prisoners feared moving on. Being an especially religious time, I'm sure many of the people held here were convinced that they would not be granted access to the kingdom of heaven, and rather than being sentenced to eternal damnation in hell, they remain here through fear of moving on, refusing to leave, halting their final judgment. Whatever deeds the individuals here committed on the outside world, crime within the jail was just as prevalent, if not more so. Men, women, children, the sane, the insane, all were held here with no segregation. It was well known for prisoners to kill each other whilst in the cells, in some cases literally to steal the coat off someone else's back. After being deemed unfit for purpose in 1825, a new jail on Vernon Gate was opened, taking over the role of the old jail, and in 1834 witnessed its first execution in the form of John Leadham, who was convicted and sentenced to death for committing bestiality with a sheep. A further 20 would meet their demise at the end of a rope here, with hundreds of others spending some of their darkest days behind its fortress-like walls. In 1919, the prison was closed to common criminals and served as a military prison for a further 10 years before much of it was demolished, the grounds now occupied by offices and residential housing after a brief stint as a Greyhound stadium in the mid-1900s. Today, both the Old Jail and Vernon Gate Jail are thought to be haunted by some of their former prisoners and jailers, with their ghosts being both seen and felt by visitors since the buildings were purchased by Richard Felix in 1997 and converted into museums. At 8 PM we arrived at the jail and were greeted by our hosts Peter and Gina, who stayed with us in the building for the remainder of the night.